So guys, what is the BRRRR method, right? Well, simply put, it's a method for acquiring lots of cash flowing assets with little to none of your own money and fast. Now, fast is a relative term, of course, but it took me 10 years to get to 12 properties. And at my peak, I was buying 12 properties a month. Let's rock and roll. All right, guys, my name is David Dodge. I am super happy and excited to be here. Sharad is one of my favorite people, and his software, reSimpli, is one of my favorite softwares. So you guys are in good hands with good people and good products. I can tell you that. My name is David Dodge. I've known Sharad for, I don't know, 4, maybe 5 years even. Shit, maybe even 6 at this point. And I've been using reSimpli exclusively, I should say, for real estate CRM for probably about 3, give or take. I'm a St. Louis, Missouri investor. I've been a full-time real estate investor for about 8 years, 38 years old. I started investing when I was 20. So I've been a real estate investor for 18 years, but I've been full-time in the business for about 8. In the last 8 years, I've done about 1,000 transactions, 700 plus wholesale deals, and over 200 BRRRR deals. And then just a bunch of random deals in between here, of course. First 10 years, guys, I did it wrong. I was buying properties full retail off the MLS using an agent. And I was going to a bank and I was buying properties with bank loans, which, as you all should know, but if you don't, when you are purchasing properties using banks, you can't really use any equity. They're going to lend you 20% of the purchase price, not 20% of what it appraises for. Okay. So the first 10 years, I say I did it wrong. Another way to word that would be I did it slow, right? To where you need 20%. Now, over the first 10 years, I did essentially buy a rental a year. 2 of those 10 years, I got lucky. So after 10 years, I had 12 rental properties. Each of those properties was roughly about $150,000 home, and 20% of 150K is 30 grand. So I either needed to borrow the 30 grand from friends and family and acquaintances and pay them back, or save 30 grand in order to buy a rental property. Well, about 7, 8 years ago, I discovered the BRRRR method, and I discovered how to acquire rental properties without having to save up the 20% or borrow it and then pay it back, and how to utilize the equity in our homes or in our assets, our rental properties, to acquire rentals with little to no money. So yeah, over the last, I've been full-time for 8 years. I'd say the first 2 to 3 years was exclusively just wholesaling properties. And then about 5, maybe 6 years ago, give or take at this point, I was like, guys, I did rentals for 10 years and then I took, 2-3 years off and just wholesaled. What am I doing? I need to get back to being a true investor, not just a marketer and a flipper. I don't really look at wholesaling as investing. It's a marketing business. Now, you can make great money being a wholesaler, don't get me wrong, but it's not necessarily investing. So again, about 5-6 years ago, I just started reading and taking courses and hiring coaches and doing everything I could to figure out how to scale the business and how to buy as many rentals as I could in the shortest amount of time. And over the last roughly 5 years, I've done about 200, maybe even a little over 200. Let's just call it 200 BRRRR deals. So let's jump in. I'll give you guys a quick presentation. We'll definitely leave some room for Q&A. And I want to throw this out there too. I love it when people ask questions and interact. You are not interrupting. If you guys have a question or a comment during the next 15 slides that I'm going to throw up here on the screen, don't think we need to wait till the end. We can obviously have a Q&A at the end by all means, but if you guys have a question about anything in real time, you're not going to be interrupting. Let me know what you got and we'll just jump on in here. So I'm just going to use Google Slides, real easy. All right. So guys, this presentation is called BRRRR Method Mastery. And I've actually written a book on the BRRRR method. It's on Amazon and Audible. I am not here to try to sell you the book by any means, but if you guys want to go deep after this presentation, that is obviously an option for you. The book's called BRRRR, The BRRRR Method. But this presentation here is called BRRRR Method Mastery. So guys, what is the BRRRR method, right? Well, simply put, It's a method for acquiring lots of cash flowing assets with little to none of your own money and fast. Now, fast is a relative term, of course, but it took me 10 years to get to 12 properties. And at my peak, I was buying 12 properties a month, right? So, I mean, 10 years, what is that? 120 months versus 1 month to acquire the same amount of assets. It's possible, right? We can do this. And I know there's probably a lot of people in here that are already utilizing the BRRRR method, which is awesome. Oh, Sharad just made a comment with a link to the book. Awesome. Okay, so BRRRR is an acronym though, but this definition here, simply put, it's a method for acquiring lots of cash flowing assets with little to none of your own money and fast. That's my definition, right? That's how I define it. But again, it is an acronym. Oop, I'm on the wrong slide here. Go to number 2. Okay, so we're going to get to the acronym here in the next slide or two, but why rentals for all of us, that maybe haven't jumped into rentals quite yet? I think rental property is the best exit strategy when it comes to real estate investing. Again, I don't really look at wholesaling as being an investing, it's more of a marketing business, right? We do fix and flips in my business as well, but I just love rentals for so many reasons. Number one, they put off cash flow. And, cash flow is passive income. And for all of us tax and IRS nerds here, passive income is taxed much, much, much lower than earned income. So the goal would be to try to get as much of our income coming from long-term capital gains or passive income in order to decrease the amount of taxes we pay in terms of percentages, on our income. Number 2, it's good debt. Right now I have about $11 million worth of real estate. Actually, it's probably closer to 12. But I owe the banks about 7 million. And I would love to owe the banks 100 million, to be quite honest with you. So I'm like 7% of the way to my goal. I got a long way to go. But with that being said, I have a couple $1 million worth of equity on these properties. So, some people will look at debt as being bad. That's, kind of the Dave Ramsey approach. And, bad debt is bad by all means, but there is such thing as good debt. And good debt is when somebody else is going to pay that debt off for you. And that's what you can achieve with rental property. Number 3 is leverage. And really, we're going to kind of circle back to leverage towards the end of this presentation here, but leverage is such an amazing thing that we can utilize when it comes to real estate investing, but not just with money and other people's money. We can actually leverage things on every step of the process, which makes it, really, really fun and easy to be able to do this at scale. Next, we have appreciation. Over the last, from 1968 to 2004, obviously that's 20 years ago, but during that stint of time, that 36-year period, we saw a 6.5% increase on average year over year. So if you know anything about compounding interest, 6.5% year over year can really grow when you're compounding, right? We all probably know and saw what happened over the last 3 years with COVID. Every property that I own went up 30% in 3 years. So, sometimes the appreciation can be much more rapidly. Properties don't always appreciate, but over a long enough period of time, they are typically going to tend to appreciate anywhere between 4 and 6% on average. I mean, that's when you're talking about, looking at the big picture, maybe 150 year time frame. So again, appreciation. Now, appreciation to me, folks, is icing on the cake. I never use appreciation in any of my calculations. I'm never, counting on appreciation. It's icing on the cake, but over a long enough time period, like I mentioned, you will take advantage of appreciation, which is awesome. Next is going to be the tax benefit. So we talked earlier just about how cash flow is taxed low as passive income, but on top of that, you also get to use what's referred to as depreciation for each property that you own that is considered to be a rental property. Can't be a primary residence unless you have multiple units that you are renting out above and beyond the one you're living in. So I guess in theory, it can be multiple units, but it's not really designed for your primary residence. It's really just designed for rental property. And the reason that you get this depreciation and this tax benefit is because the government wants to reward those who provide housing to their fellow Americans and their neighbors and their peers. And they just figured that, whenever you rent a property out, you are going to have maintenance on that property and you're going to have capital expenditures. And they don't want landlords going out of business left and right and not having enough housing supply for our fellow neighbors and American citizens here. So they give us an advantage, and that is a depreciation, which is essentially a phantom expense on our taxes. It offsets our earned income, of effectively making the amount of taxes that we pay, and again, in terms of percentages, much lower. So it's a very, very, very powerful thing. And then last but not least, guys and girls, we have wealth creation, right? We aren't taxed on wealth creation, only income. So if we can add $500,000, $1 million, maybe even several $1,000,000 a year to our net worth in terms of equity capture and wealth appreciation, we are not paying taxes whenever we create wealth. We are only paying taxes when we create income. So that's one of the beautiful things about rentals is we can create a lot of wealth. We can even borrow against that wealth and leverage that wealth, but we're not going to have to pay taxes until we have, an income producing scenario where we, if we were to sell the property or maybe we're cash flowing on that property. But again, the point here, without diving too deep down the rabbit hole, is that wealth creation is one of the best advantages of rental properties, because again, we aren't taxed. If I go create $1 million this year in equity, which I should pretty easily, I'm not going to have to pay any taxes on that. Now, when I sell it and capture that, I will, but in the meantime, I won't, and I can even borrow against it. All right, back to good.
Another really cool thing with rentals is once you buy a property, you've kind of locked in your buy price, you've locked in your mortgage expense. And after that, your rental income is going to go up. So your difference between the income that you're getting and your mortgage payment is only going to go up and up. Like if I look back at when I bought my first property in 2010, I still have a couple of loans on my property. I'm paying like $200 or $300 per month on those properties, but my rental income has doubled on those properties from like 10, 12 years ago. So that's another huge benefit. You're locking in your price when you buy the property, and rental income is only going to go up. Some years it's going to go up a lot, some years it's going to go up a little bit, but even if you factor in,
very rarely goes down.
Yeah, I've never seen it go down in the last 12 years since I've been buying. But another thing to keep in mind is like your rental income, in addition to what you mentioned about the appreciation, your rental income is also going up. So which is going to, add additional, it's going to increase your value of your property, plus your cash flow is also going to go up.
Yeah. And another way to word that, guys, or another way to look at that, I love that, Sherrod. It's such a great point. Another way to look at it too, especially if you fix in your interest rate on your loan, the loan gets easier and easier to pay because it's not adjusted for inflation. So as you all know, the government likes to print money like it's going out of style. It's crazy. Nothing that I can particularly do about it, but it is what it is, right? Well, as the purchasing power of our dollar decreases, it means that we're typically able to earn more money at the same amount of work and time that we spend. So essentially what that means though is that the loan becomes easier and easier to pay for multiple reasons. Number one, rent goes up, but number two, the purchasing power of the dollar is going to be decreasing almost every year. So yeah, Sherrod, love it. Awesome. Okay, guys, BRRRR method mastery. Why would we want to use the BRRRR method? I know that's probably on some of your minds right now. Well, we touched on a couple of the advantages, but essentially it's going to help you create passive income. It's going to be able to help you quit a job if you are doing this part-time. You can buy rental properties and essentially create and replace the income from your job. It's going to give you freedom. There's tax advantages along with wealth creation, which we just touched on. Banks love to lend on real estate, right? Go try to borrow money from a bank to buy some stock. It's going to be very difficult. Now, you can, of course, use margin if you already have money, but you're not going to be able to get, 80% loan to value on a stock. You're typically going to get 40%, right? 30%, 20% in some cases, right? But with real estate, I can bring, 20 grand to the table and get an $80,000 loan to be able to go purchase a $100,000 property. Or I can use the BRRRR method and I can bring nothing to the table, assuming we follow these steps, which we're going to get into next. But again, the point here, banks love real estate. It's a tangible asset, and it provides them with security against those loans. Leverage, we're going to talk about that towards the end, but you can use leverage on every step of the BRRRR method. And then last but not least, it's super easy, at least in my opinion, it's super, super easy. So guys, what is it, right? It's an acronym. Well, it stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. And there's some people out there that refer to this method as the BRRRR's method, like my buddy Sam Prim. And it's the same thing. He just replaces the last R with an S, and he makes that word scale instead of repeat. So you may have heard of the BRRRR method. You may have heard of the BRRRR's method. It's the same thing at the end of the day. It's just, do you want to use the word repeat or you want to use the word scale? They both mean the same thing in my eyes, essentially. So we're going to buy properties. We're going to rehab those properties. We're going to rent them out. And then we're going to go to the bank to refinance. And remember earlier I said, the first 10 years I did it wrong. I did it slow because I needed to put down 20%. And the reason is when you're walking into a bank or a credit union or whatever sort of long-term lender that you want to work with, they are going to want to see skin in the game. And when you buy a property, they're going to want to see 20% down. It doesn't matter if you're buying that property for 50% of what it appraises for. You're buying it, you're creating new risk. They're going to typically want to see 20% down, and that 20% is on the purchase price. The appraisal is kind of irrelevant, assuming the appraised value is equal to or above the purchase price, okay? But when we use the BRRRR method, guys, we're going to the bank. We've already bought the property, ideally with private or hard money, okay? Somebody else's money, other people's money. So we've already owned the asset. So now when we go to the bank, assuming we've rehabbed it and rented it out already, but once you build up enough experience as well as relationships with your bank, you can kind of even bypass the whole rehab and rent it out phases. But let's not get into that. We can circle back to that. But typically you're going to want to go through this flow right here. But here's the beautiful thing about this method. When you go to the bank to refinance a property, the bank doesn't look at it as being quite as risky as a new purchase. When you are purchasing a property, you're essentially creating risk, okay? But when you go to a bank and you say, hey, I've already borrowed money from a friend, an acquaintance, a hard money lender, a private money lender, whatever, and now I just want to change who I owe the money to. I want to refinance the property. And in the bank size, and I don't really understand why they see it this way, but I can tell you that they all do. They say, oh, okay, we would love to do a refinance with you, Dave. We look at this as being a whole lot less risky because they're essentially getting to piggyback on the original lender. Now, again, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because I could call up my aunt or my grandma and just say, hey, I need to go borrow 100 grand, 80,000 to buy a property, 20,000 to fix it. And my aunt or my grandma isn't going to underwrite a damn thing. They're not going to pull my credit. They're not going to ask to see, anything typically. They're just going to say, okay, Dave, here you go. But the bank gets to piggyback on the original bank's or lender's underwriting, even though that may or may not have even had any underwriting processes in place. But again, we can use this to our advantage because again, like I said earlier, we're not creating new risk, right? We're transferring risk that was already created up here on this buy step. So now, because we're not creating new risk and we're not, asking them to help us buy a property, we already own the property. And now we're just going to refinance how we're going to be structuring our long-term debt. They will say, hey, Dave, we will lend you 80% of what it appraises for. So when you're buying a property, it's typically going to be about 80, sometimes a little less, 70, 75, but let's just use 80 for simple math, % of the purchase price. Well, guys, when we're refinancing, the purchase price is irrelevant because we already own the property. So now they're going to lend, 70, 75. Again, we're going to use 80 for simple math. They're going to lend 80% of what it appraises for. That's the big difference here. So if we can buy a property at a discount and maybe even add a little bit more value during our rehab, and we can be all into the property for, let's say 75% of what it appraises for, and the bank lends 80%, we can be all into an asset with no money out of pocket. That extra 5% can go cover the cost of our private or hard money lenders. Okay. And then again, last step could be repeat, could be scale, however you guys want to look at it. So let's break these steps down just a little bit more here. Buy. We have to buy at a discount, and ideally with other people's money. And the reason that we want to buy it at a discount is because we should never be paying retail for properties. That's number one. Number two, there's no better way to get a good amount of equity on a piece of property than when you buy it. When we're rehabbing properties, we shoot to make a little bit more value out of it. But even if we put 20 grand in and it raises the value by only 20,000, we haven't really gained any value there. All right. We shoot to make a little bit of value, but even if we don't create additional value above and beyond the dollar for dollar that we spend, we're always buying at discounts. Okay. And then of course, I love using other people's money because it's essentially not my money, right? But there's also another reason that we want to try to use other people's money. When we skip ahead, and I'm going to skip the rehab and the rent process just for a second, we're going to circle back. But when we skip ahead to the refinance process, if the bank doesn't see any money coming back to us, all right, it makes a much easier refinance because we're going to be able to use a refinance that's referred to as a rate and term refinance versus a cash out refinance. Now, the big difference between the two is cash out means you're going to walk away with cash. And banks don't typically like doing cash out refinances. They'll do them, but they don't typically like doing cash out refinances up to 80%. From my experience, I've done probably 40 of them, 30 or 40 of them. From my experience, they will still do cash out refinances, but they're gonna, clip you down a little bit. Typically, it's going to be closer to the 70% of what it appraises for, because again, there's a little bit more risk from the banker's eyes by giving you a check for $20,000 or $30,000 and paying off your lender. So I like to use as much of the OPM or other people's money when I'm buying properties as possible, because then when I go to get my refinance loan, the bank doesn't see a bunch of money coming back to me, even if it's not profit, right? If I'm going to put 20,000 into a rehab, but I need to get that 20,000 out, that's still a cash refinance. So I try to borrow 100, sometimes even 105 or 110% of what I need. Because if you think about it, let's say I need 100 and I'm going to pay a private money lender, let's say 5,000, that's 105. But what happens if I go to the bank or I go to my private lender and I borrow 110? So I borrow the 80 to buy it, 20 to fix it, that's 100. And then another 10. I know I'm going to have to pay that lender 5,000 at the end in interest, but I have an additional 5 grand now. And if I go and I do a rate and term refinance at 80%, I've essentially done a cash out refinance. I've just cashed out in the beginning of the deal versus with the bank. So there is some loopholes that us investors can kind of use to still utilize a cash out refinance. We just over borrow a little bit in the beginning. And sometimes I'll over borrow 20 or even 30,000. And I may have to bring 10,000 to the table when I go to refinance, but I have 20 or 30 extra thousand that I've already borrowed. So again, I'm still able to kind of utilize this cash out refinance. I just do it in the beginning. Kind of a pro tip. All right, let's get back to the point here. So we're going to buy at a discount. We're going to use other people's money, guys. We're going to rehab or update, renovate, however you want to call that. But we're going to essentially make the property tenant proof, make it look nice. Now, there's a couple reasons that we're going to do this. The main reason is we're going to reduce the risk on the deal. Because again, when we're going in the bank for a refinance, that's what they're looking at. They're looking at the deal. They're looking at the borrower. How much risk is there? What kind of rate should we offer them? What kind of term should we offer them? Are we going to give them a full 80% loan to value on this appraisal? Well, when we rehab a property, we're reducing the risk greatly for the bank, because if the bank needs to, for whatever reason, foreclose and take the property back because we aren't making our payments, it's going to be much easier for them to liquidate that property and get their money back. So number one, we're going to rehab it to reduce the risk for the lender. But number two, we want to reduce the capital expenditures that we may have come our way over the next 5 or 7 or even 10 years. So what we're going to typically do when we're rehabbing properties, we're going to make them look pretty, but we're typically trying to do the big things first when we're using the BRRRR method, right? So if a roof has, let's say, 8 or 10 years left on the lifespan, we might even just replace it to just not have to mess with it in 8 or 10 years. So typically we're doing roofs, we're doing windows, we're doing HVACs, we're doing flooring. Those things typically always come first. Also stack pipes and electrical, like panels, water heaters too. All these big capital expenditures we're going to try to knock out. It's going to reduce our risk with the lender, but it's also going to reduce our future expenses on these properties. All right. Additionally, though, by having the property be rehabbed and updated and clean and new paint and new flooring and oftentimes new kitchens and bathrooms, not only is it going to be easier to rent in terms of speed, but it's also going to allow us to get market rents or oftentimes above market rents. So it's going to give us an increased rental income. But there's more, folks. But wait, there's more. But also by having a updated and newly rehabbed property, it's going to increase the duration of the tenants. The tenants aren't just going to want to live there for a year. Typically, they're going to want to stay for 2 or 3 or 4, or in some cases 5, 6, 7 years, because they're moving into a property that is beautiful. It's got a new kitchen and a new roof and new windows, and it's clean and got new floors and new paint and all this stuff, right? So the rehab is a really, really big part of the process because it checks a lot of boxes. It reduces the risk, increases the rental income, reduces the capital expenditures in the next, I call it immediate future, but really when I say immediate, I'm talking 5, 7, 10 years, give or take. And then it also increases the duration of which the tenants are going to want to stick around. So all of these things are advantages to us, the investor, as well as help reduce the risk for the long-term lenders, the banks and the credit unions. Next is going to be to rent it out. And guys, again, we're going to rent it out at the top of the market. I just mentioned that because we've got a newly updated and newly rehabbed or newly renovated property. All right, next we're going to head on over to our credit union or our local bank. I'm not typically refinancing with, Chase or Wells Fargo or Bank of America or US Bank or any of these big institutions, because they're not typically going to want to do portfolio loans, and they're not typically going to want to do commercial loans to small landlords. They will, but it's a pain in the butt. My favorite banks are going to be the local banks that have 5, 10, maybe 15 or 20 branches, but not 100, right? They're going to be the smaller, more local banks. Occasionally we'll work with regional banks, but mostly smaller local banks. And do not discount your local credit unions. Your local credit unions love landlords because, again, they're going to be local and they're going to be portfolio loans. And when I mean portfolio loans, or when I say portfolio loans, what I mean is they're not going to take the loans to Wall Street and sell them off on the secondary market. They're going to keep these assets within their business and under their roofs. And then the last R here could, again, also be an S for scale. It's the same thing. But really, guys, if you do this 10, 20, 30, 50 times, doesn't have to be that many, of course, but you can create passive income, you can create wealth, and you can essentially buy yourself freedom. And I don't know about you guys, but I want freedom more than I want anything else. If you ask a stranger on the street, I would say 20 times out of 20, and you say, hey, what's the most valuable thing that I could essentially give you right here, right now? Most people are going to say money. But really what they want isn't money. It's they want what that money can buy them. And what that is freedom. It's time freedom, it's location freedom. And essentially owning rental properties can help you achieve that freedom. Now it's going to do so by giving you money on autopilot. But again, money isn't typically the goal, right? It may seem like it's the goal in the beginning, but when you start asking why, you guys maybe have heard of the book, Start with Why. I believe that's what it's called, Sherrod, right? Simon Sinek?
Simon Sinek, yeah.
Yeah. So start with why. Well, if you keep asking why, right? Why do you want more money? Why do you want money on autopilot? Guys, it's because you can gain freedom from that money. And that's what the BRRRR method is going to allow you to achieve.
It's funny, when I started, it's BRRRR method, really got popular, that term in last 5, 7, 10 years. When I started, this is literally the process I followed to build up my portfolio of 50 properties. And I didn't have a name for it, but literally that's exactly what I was doing. And it may seem like a so slow process in the beginning, but it's just is that by Albert Einstein? I don't know who said it. Like the eighth wonder of the world is the power of cumulative return or something. It's funny. Like I was thinking about it. That's
Yeah,
literally what I was saying.
compound
I was
interest
going
is the eighth
compound
power,
interest. Yeah, exactly.
or the eighth
Yeah,
wonder
the
of the
eighth one.
world is compound
Yeah,
interest. It's
yeah.
amazing.
So no, man, this is literally the process I followed to build up my print. And then you're right. My goal was to be free, financially free, and have control of my time and my money. So yeah, no, and really great stuff.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yep. All right, cool. So let's keep it moving here. So number one, we're going to circle back and we're going to go through each of these steps. And I'm going to try to wrap this up here in the next 15, 20 minutes, guys. I promise I do my best not to bore you here. So again, if you have any questions or comments, just unmute and just interrupt. You're not interrupting, I promise. But guys, when it comes to the BRRRR method, I mentioned earlier, we need to be able to buy at a discount, right? So there's two simple strategies or ways in which we are going to essentially accomplish a goal. All right. So when it comes to the BRRRR method, we're going to use two simple ways to achieve a simple goal. That goal is this, guys: be all in for less than 80% of what it will appraise for after the rehab is completed. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, sometimes we can bypass the rehab. Sometimes we can bypass even renting it. But again, that's typically going to come with a bunch of experience and a great relationship with your lender. If you are new, you are most likely going to have to rehab the property and get it rented. And you might even have 4 or 5 or even 6 months of seasoning. That's okay. Once you do that 2, 3, 4 times with your lender, you're going to be able to negotiate with that lender and get the seasoning to go away completely.
Hey, David, can you quickly explain what seasoning is?
Yes, of course. So seasoning is essentially the bank's way of reducing its risk even more. So we talked a little bit about this already. Banks want to reduce their risk. That's why they don't lend 80% of what a property appraises for when you are buying it. They will only do that when you are refinancing it, right? Well, if you are new to the game and you don't have any rentals, or maybe you only have a couple, the bank's going to say, hey, we're good with an 80% refinance, but we want to make sure you know what you're doing. So we want to make sure that you own the property for 6 months and or that you've rented it successfully for 6 months. And essentially, they're just saying, prove it to us that you know what you're doing. And they're going to want to see the bank statements of the money coming into your account from you collecting it from your tenants. Well, after you get through 4 or 5 or 6 months, and that's all to be negotiated, by the way, then they're going to say, all right, cool. We've checked the box that David is a stand-up guy and, knows how to collect rent from his tenants and is doing what he says he's going to do. And again, they are doing this to reduce their risk with you. So again, if you are new to this or you haven't done a bunch of rentals, you're most likely going to have seasoning. And in fact, when I go to a new bank, even after doing 200 of these, they often require me to have seasoning at least for the first couple deals. And then after we do a couple deals, I can then go in and I can say, guys, this seasoning's a pain in my butt. I'm going to go elsewhere if you don't remove it. And then they remove it, right? So it's definitely to be something that can be negotiated. But seasoning is simply, it is simply the ability to reduce risk by showing and proving that you are capable of being a landlord for the most part. Yeah, good question, Shrad. So guys, the goal, so simple: be all in. All in is in all caps here for a reason. For less, equal to or less than, ideally less than 80% of what it appraises for, because that's what the bank's going to lend. So when I say all in, I don't just mean purchase. I'm talking purchase, rehab, holding costs, interest, utilities, closing costs. When I say all in, I mean all in, everything. So that typically means that we're buying properties at 70 to 75% of the ARV minus repairs. And then we're also going to gain a few percent, not a ton, 3, 4, 5% additional value by doing the rehab. So if we can be all in at 75% and the bank gives us an 80% loan, I can use that additional 5% to cover my hard money or my private money interest and acquire an asset that's been rehabbed, by the way, at top of the market rent with very low risk, tenants that are going to want to stay, right? And it's going to rent quickly because of the fact that it's rehabbed. So that rehab is definitely part of the process. So guys, what are the two simple ways that we're going to use to achieve being all in at 80%? Well, number one, it's buying it at a discount. I mentioned it twice already, but the simple way, number one, is that we are truly going to be buying properties at a discount, ideally 15 to 20% minimum. If we can buy properties at 25, 30, 35%, then that's going to be even greater. Okay. That's going to be even better for us. Right. But again, we typically want to be at least 15% if we see the ability to add value with the rehab. If we think the rehab is going to essentially be a break even, and what I mean by that is we spend 20 and the value goes up 20, we didn't create any additional value, then we want to be at 20%, at a discount when we're buying it. But again, sometimes I can be at 30% or 35% discount, which only helps our stance here. Guys, simple way number two is increasing its value by the rehab. All right. So updating the property, ideally for every $2, ideally $2 of increased value for every $1 spent. But I'm going to be honest, that is kind of, what's the word here? Optimistic. If I go spend 20,000 on a rehab, is the property value going to go up 40? Maybe, but maybe not. Typically it's going to be pretty close to 1-to-1 or just above that. So yes, this is an approach, but I really want to emphasize here that the best way about doing this is buying at a discount. Are you going to increase the value rehabbing it? Well, you should, absolutely, but don't count on, putting down 20,000 in rehab and getting a $40,000 appreciated value. It's possible, but it's much easier to buy at a discount and not count on that increased value. But regardless, these two ways are simply put how we are going to go about achieving the goal, which is to be, I got to go back, which is to be all in, purchase, rehab, interest, everything at 80% of that number. All right. All right. Moving along, buying property. We want to be all in at, 75 to 80% or less of what it will appraise for after the rehab is complete. The plan is to buy property at a discount and then rehab it and update it, which will increase its value even more. And then we want to get it appraised. And if you hit a goal you can acquire, you will be able to acquire it with little to none of your own money, assuming that you hit the goal of being all in at, 75 or 80% or maybe even less. Because again, the banks are going to typically lend about 80%. So guys, how do we fund the deals? Well, I typically use private money. Sometimes I'll work with hard money lenders. I like private money better because it's a little cheaper and it's easier to use. Remember earlier when I said I may go to my aunt or my grandma to borrow some money? Well, guys, they're not pulling my credit. They're not even looking at the deal. They're like, oh, Dave's a real estate investor. He's been doing this for 8 years. He knows what he's doing. It is so easy to get money from my friends and my family and my acquaintances. And I can typically get it at about 10%. Sometimes less, sometimes more, but typically it's about 10%. Well, hard money lenders, it's not necessarily harder. All right. Hard money isn't hard to get. It's referred to as hard money because it's money being lent on hard assets. That's why it's referred to as hard money. Hard money is a great approach. They typically have much, much deeper pockets than the private money lenders. My aunt and my grandma only have so much money to lend. Private money lenders are often, not always, but often backed by hedge funds or big institutions, and they have very deep pockets. My private lenders are typically good for 200 to 300 grand, sometimes maybe even 400 or 500 grand. But I don't have a single private lender that's going to lend me $18 million. And if I come across the right deal, I could get that much from a hard money lender. Again, assuming it's the right deal. Point I want to make here, hard money lenders are going to be a little bit more costly, 12, 15, maybe even 17, 18, 19% in some scenarios. But again, this is how we're going to fund our deals. When it comes to rehabbing, guys, you can hire a general contractor to help you with these rehabs, or you can learn to do it yourself. Time, quality, and cost. Pick two. You're not going to get all three. All right. When it comes to rentals, it's going to usually be the first two. I'm not looking for the top of the line, highest quality materials, or even the highest quality labor. I don't want it to be bad, but I'm not looking for a 10 out of 10. I'm going to settle with a 7 or an 8. No problem. What I am looking for is somebody that can do it at a reasonable price in a reasonable amount of time. But if you're trying to get all three, you're lying to yourself. Just think about this for a second. You can often get a good price and a good quality if it's going to take a lot of time. You can often get a good price and low time, but they're going to sacrifice the quality. If you want time and quality, you want it done quick and high quality, it's going to cost you. You're never going to get all 3 10s. You're going to have to sacrifice one of those. And again, when I'm using the BRRRR method and I'm doing this with rental properties, I don't really care so much that it's a 10 out of 10 on quality. It's okay to be a 7 or an 8, right? Maybe even a 9, whatever, but it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, because I am going to want to try to get a really, really good, reasonable amount of cost or price on the job. And I don't want it to take 4 months. You know, my typical rehabs are going to take 3 to 6 weeks, and that's it. And my guys are typically doing 2, 3, 4 at a time too. So it's not like they're at the same house every single day for 6 straight weeks. They may be there for 2, 3 days and then gone for 2, 3 days and then back for 2, 3 days. But again, this is what we're going to do. Now, earlier I mentioned leverage. All right. I'm going to use leverage when I'm buying properties because I'm going to have awesome systems like reSimpli, and I'm going to have virtual assistants, and I'm going to have call centers, and I'm going to have automated marketing like AdWords and stuff like that. So I'm using leverage on the buy. I'm also using leverage when I am funding my deals, again, on the buy. I'm also using leverage when I'm rehabbing. Guys, I don't own very many tools. You know, I know enough tools to maybe change a light socket here in my house, but I don't put tools in my car. I don't even own a truck because I don't want anything to do with rehabbing properties. I am going to utilize general contractors and handymen and subcontractors to do all of these rehabs for me. So just another couple things that are so great about leverage. We can use leverage in every step of the process. And I kind of joke around with my wife sometimes, but I say, you know, the main thing that we do is that we're professional check writers. If you think about it, right? Yeah, we spend time and energy finding deals and running appointments. But once we get the good deals, we borrow money from private or hard money lenders, right? We then use that money to buy the house. We write a check to buy the house. We then hire a general contractor and we use that money to pay those people and to buy the materials. All right. And then we're going to go and we're going to hire a property manager, and we're going to use that money to hire the property manager and get the property leased. And then we're going to go to a bank. And this is the last step behind repeat. And we're going to leverage that long-term bank relationship or that that credit union, right? That local bank or that credit union to be able to acquire and get into that deal. So leverage is a big, big piece of this. All right, let's see here. When we're going to the refinancing step, guys, we're going to definitely want to look at the products that are out there. I'm typically getting commercial loans because I don't want the liability of them in my name. The duration of the loans, I'm jumping around here, guys. I'm sorry. The duration of my average loan is going to be 20 years. It's going to be a commercial loan. And when I say 20 years, that's the amortization schedule. It's a 20-year amortization schedule, but it's typically going to be a 3 or 5 year fixed rate. But the advantage is they don't balloon. In fact, I don't have a single loan on my portfolio. I think I have close to 50 loans right now that has a balloon. Every one of my loans that's long-term on the refinance is going to have a 3 to 5 year fixed rate. And then after that, it's going to renew to a new rate for an additional 3 or 5 years. But the loan itself is a 20-year loan. Now I have some that are 25. I even have some that are 30, and it's both amortization and rate that are going to be fixed. But the majority of them are going to be 3 to 5 year fixed rates with 20-year terms. And at the end of those fixed rate periods, they don't balloon. They just renew to a new rate for another 3 to 5 year fixed. But again, you're going to use that amortization schedule to pay those off. And then guys, last but not least here, we are going to repeat the process, right? We're going to do this until we've created enough income from our passive income or enough equity that we can utilize that to replace our day jobs. And that's really what this is all about. All right. So my freedom number, here's an example. This is a couple years dated at this point. I'd say now it's probably double this number, but it's only because my lifestyle has doubled. All right. But For example, about 4 or 5 years ago, when I started doing this at scale, I created this presentation, and I had a $1,900 mortgage on my primary home. I had a $750 car payment. I spent $1,500 a month on food and drink, probably another $800 on entertainment, and then about $350 a month on my health insurance. Again, this has changed. This is a couple years dated, but it's very, very relative. Okay. So the total amount of money that I needed a month to replace my day job was $5,300. Well, guys, if you are buying, there it goes. If you are buying assets that's kick off $300 a month in cash flow, you only need 17, or let's call it 18. Let's round up. You need 18 rental properties to be able to live the same lifestyle that you had with your day job. Without having that day job, you can quit and you can have freedom. So essentially what I want you to do is I want you to figure out what your number is. What's your freedom number? And then I want you to figure out how much assets in your town or in the town that you invest in kick off in cash flow, and then just do some simple math, right? Divide the total amount that you need by the average amount of cash flow to get the number of assets that you are going to need to replace your day job. And it's literally that simple. We can work backwards. So my goal when I first started was to get to 18 properties. And then I realized, well, shoot, I got a partner. So 18 doesn't get me to 5,300 a month at 300 a month in cash flow per. I need to double that. So we took it to 40. And right now we have 120 units. So we are cash flowing. It used to be about 23,000 a month when we had lower rates. The rates have obviously gone up, but we're still cash flowing close to 15 grand a month with 120 units. So it's very, very fun. Guys, this is the last slide for today here. It's a recap. So really, before we even do the buy, which tends to typically be the first step, I want to emphasize one quick point. I don't want any of you to leave here, go find a deal, borrow private or hard money and get into the deal and start working your way through the process if you're not going to be able to get approved for that refinance down here on step 6 in this recap. So number one, I always tell all my students and friends and just anybody and everybody, guys, if you're going to do this method, step 1 really should be go get pre-approved for the long-term financing so you don't get stuck. The last thing I want you all to do is to get stuck. So before you go buy the property and borrow money and you start taking risk, which is what investing is by definition, number 1, you should go get pre-approved. Go talk to your local banks, your local credit unions. And here's the deal. I get denied all the time. I got 120 units, 5 million in equity. I've done 200 of these BRRRR deals. And sometimes banks just don't have the appetite. My credit's 815, 820, right? So there's no reason that a bank should not want to work with me. But sometimes it's not me. It's the market. It's the environment. It's the economy. So you're going to want to go and you're going to want to find the bank that's local to you that is willing to lend, and do that in advance. Also learn from them. Hey, what's the seasoning requirements? If I bring you a deal that I've already owned, that I've rehabbed, are you going to give me 80%, right? Just make a friend. And essentially you can turn your local lenders into mentors and coaches on financing, and they don't even realize it because they're just trying to sell you the loan anyway. But I love turning my local bankers into my mentors to help me make this process even faster and even smoother. So again, don't discount that. Number 2 is to then do what you're probably already doing: market, get sellers on the phone, get out and run appointments, make friends, follow up. Simply is going to help you do all of these things, and they're going to help you do them with ease. So go find those discounted deals. And then we're going to jump on in, just like Sharad and I were talking about. We're going to buy them at deep discounts, and we're going to typically use other people's money. Now, you can do this with your own money, but you're not typically going to be able to get an 80% loan because, again, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to become a cash out refinance versus a rate and term. It's not really different at the end of the day, other than the bank just clips you. So I prefer to use everybody else's money as much as possible, just for that reason. I want to get the highest amount of leverage that I can. All right. Now let's talk about leverage here. I'm going to use virtual assistants. I'm going to use automated marketing like AdWords and other stuff like that to help find these private, or to find these discounted deals. I'm going to use general subcontractors to help me rehab and to update these properties. I'm going to use property managers to rent them out and keep them rented and keep the rent collected and keep the tenants happy. And then I'm going to use long-term lenders with my refinance. That's leverage to pay back the private and hard money lenders, so I can then move to step 7 to repeat this process over and over again. And again, the goal here is to buy you freedom, buy you the ability to not have to report to the boss or to have that job. And that's a wrap.
Great presentation, man. Like, this is literally the exact same process that I followed. And one other thing I would say that has really worked for me in my market is, when you find a local lender, like, do whatever you can to build relationships. Like what we started doing was, because these are portfolio lenders, so they have a little bit more leverage and, override some, decisions. If you don't have the perfect credit, they can, override some of that. Like, for example, something as simple as, on like holidays and stuff, like, year end, just send them like a bottle of wine, just send them like whatever, a small gift. You will be shocked how much difference that makes.
The service you get is going to be night and day.
The service you get, the service you get, it's going to be night and day. So just those simple things, like that's just another R, I guess, like the relationship part of it, especially like the lender is the key part of this whole, BRRRR method. The better relationships you can build with the local lender that you have, the more properties, honestly, you'll be able to buy at the end of the day. Because if you're working with with a small bank assistant VP of lending, and they absolutely love working with you, they will go to bat for you, pushing your case on getting your loan approved, or getting you approved for more than 10, 12, 15 properties. Just small things make a huge difference.
That's
so great presentation, David. I have a question for you. Yeah. So when you are, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to read the comments here, but go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah. So I was going to say, when you are, so let's say if I'm starting out, would you start calling the lenders, and would you start like asking them what portfolio, I mean, if they're portfolio lender, if they're not, if they're going to underwrite your loan based on like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, would you just not work with them? Would you only work
here's
with
the thing. You're
lenders?
not going to have a lender that will let a loan renew and then sell it off on the secondary market. They're only going to sell off loans that balloon, because the people that are buying the loans aren't wanting to carry the risk. So that's kind of a two-part question, Shrad. I'm glad you asked. But I'm typically going in my local banks, my local credit unions. Again, I'm not really typically working with banks that do above or have above like 15, 20 branches tops. Now, there is a caveat to this. Right now, my partner and I have roughly 15 loans that are 30-year fixed loans, and they're to our entity. So they're commercial loans that are 30 years. And we're using these national lenders. Now, they're not Wells Fargo or Chase or anything like that. We use 3 of them, and I'll share them with you right now. Aloha, Renovo, and Kiavi. These are the 3 lenders that we will use that will do 30-year loans. And now they will sell those off, but it doesn't matter because the loan's fixed. It's a 30-year fixed rate with a 30-year amortization table. Now, the only downside to these loans is there's 2. Number 1, they're going to have prepayment penalties for up to 5 years. I think Aloha and Renovo are 3-year prepayment penalties, and I believe Kiavi's 5. It kind of varies. And the second downside to these loans is that the cost to refinance, like the actual loan product itself, is typically going to be 1.5 to 2 times the cost of what your local commercial lenders are going to charge. So instead of charging, $1,500 to give you the loan, they may charge you $4,000, right? It could even be above 2x, right? But they're going to give you a 30-year loan. So I do work with some national lenders for 30-year products, but typically speaking, I'd say 70% of my loans, they're with super local banks. And what I mean local is, they're right up the street from my house or within a 10, 15-minute drive of where I live. And I'm not typically cold calling them. I'm walking in the bank, guys. I'm walking in. I'm asking to speak to, not necessarily trying to get in front of the president, although that happens a lot. I'm looking to speak to the commercial lending department. And usually it's just like one or two people in the back of the bank. And I'm like, hey, I'm Dave. This is who I am. My office is there. I live here. I went to this high school. This is my market. You know, I'm basically going in and I'm trying to build rapport right off the bat with these people. And my goal is to create a relationship with them and do lots of business with them, right? So I'm going to show them my experience by, you know, other things that I may have done, you know, recently or even over the years. But more importantly than anything, it's to just build a relationship with them. I want to know who they are, but at the same time, I want them to know who I am. So that's a great question. I'm not typically ever calling lenders unless I already have a relationship with them and I need something or whatnot. I'm walking in and I'm getting face to face and I'm trying to shake hands with these folks.
Hey, David, what were the two, Kiavi, what were the other two lenders that you mentioned? Aloha.
Yeah,
Is that
Kiavi
Aloha
lending. So lending home. Let's see, hold on. Kiavi
I've used lending one in the past. They're similar to Kiavi.
lending one's great.
I
Yep. I haven't used
had
them, but
pretty decent experience with them.
I've heard really good things about them. So Kiavi used to be lending home, but now they're called Kiavi. And then the other two that I use are Aloha, ALOHA.
Is that Aloha private lending? Is that what it is?
It's, if you go in and you just type in Aloha Capital, you know, real estate investor loans, it should pop right up.
Okay,
I'm not
it's
sure
Aloha Capital. Okay.
Yeah, Aloha
Yeah,
Capital. I'm not sure the exact URL of their website, but yeah, Aloha's pretty good. And Caitlin is my contact over there with a C.
Okay.
So if you guys hit them up, ask to speak to Caitlin, tell her you know David Dodge, and she'll hook you up. Not necessarily with a you know better rate, but she'll be attentive to your file, is what I mean by that, right? And then the other one is Renovo. RENOVO. And I don't know the URL, you know, the exact URL, but
I'll pick it up. Yeah.
But yeah, those are the ones that I use. Let's hit some of the questions here. Any referral on a non-owner occupant rental houses with under 2 points and under 8% APR, minimum 15-year amortization? So yeah, Renovo, Kiavi, Lending One, and Aloha all should be able to do under 8%. I don't pay any points on my long-term financing. Now, I will sometimes pay points to private or hard money lenders, and that APR is going to be much higher, but that's just short term. That's 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. You can pretty easily get, I just refinanced 6 on Friday, and I got a 6.7% 30-year fixed rate with Renovo. 6.7%. Now it cost me $6,000 or $7,000 because there was 6 houses, you know, to do the loan product. And there's of course 3 years of prepayment penalties, which is fine. It's 3, 2, 1, not a big deal. Even if I were to pay those, I'd still make tons of money selling my properties, but they are fixed. And you can pick 15, 20, 25, even 30. I have never done anything over 30, but I'm not against it. In fact, I'm doing a motel conversion right now that I may actually consider a 40-year loan on, just because it would just cash flow like crazy. So yeah, great question. Also part 2 of that says for HELOC type for non-owner occupied houses. Yeah, I mean,
so you would go with the same lender. I would go with the same lenders. Yeah, I personally used Lending One like a few years ago. I had a pretty good experience. Like as long as you have paperwork, it was a pretty straightforward loan.
Yeah, and Lending One can do the private, or like I guess it's hard money, but they can do the hard money up front, and then they can convert it to a long-term loan too. Yep. And I think all of these links right here can. Now, I don't typically, I'm a full transparency, guys and girls. I don't typically use these banks here that are listed for my private or hard money. And the only reason is because I just have easier access to private and hard money from my local network or my local RIA. I borrow money from my RIA all the time because it's like, you know, the guy that runs the RIA has a lending business. So it's not from the RIA, but that's where I met him at, right? So I want to emphasize, do not discount your RIA. Most of my private and hard money lenders outside of my immediate family were people I met at RIAs. So I typically use my private or hard money from there, and then I will go to these folks here, but don't let me stop you from going directly to them. I'm just telling you how I do it, by all means. Absolutely. All right, what else we got? Can you spell the names of those banks? Looks like Shrad's already got that one checked. And then Michael also says, do you suggest 30-year loans in this rate environment? I know a lot of BRRRR guys are doing 5 and 7-year ARMs right now. Believing rates will come down and that at that time they can refi with the 30-year. So yes and no. I don't do any ARMs because ARMs by definition, not all, but most, 95% of ARMs by definition have a balloon. I don't want that because what happens if the rates don't come down? Then I'm starting all over on my amortization table. I'm not arguing by any means. I just personally don't want any loan that will not let me renew with a new rate and essentially lock in my amortization. My partner,
So
Mike, and
if
I,
you
go ahead.
so if you can get a 5-year or 7-year ARM loan with 30-year amortization, would you do that without
Assuming
a
they'll
balloon?
let me renew when the rate term is about to expire. You know what I'm saying? It has to be a renewable loan. And the banks are going to typically say, well, all of our loans are renewable. And I'm like, cool, put it in writing. Don't send me a bill for 180 grand 3 months before my loan's due. Send me the option to renew it. And guys, from my experience, renewing a loan with the bank costs under $500. It's just paying for their time to go pull the market's rates and then do some paperwork to amend your loan. You're not having to go do another refinance or another closing. It's just like one page they send over and they want you to sign it and they notarize it and you're done. And then you're still locked in on your same amortization table from the beginning, right? Let's say I have a 20-year amortization with a 3-year fixed rate. Well, that renews. Well, now I'm on year 4 of my amortization table with another 3-year fixed rate that's going to be for year 4, 5, and 6. So to answer the question here, though, it doesn't really matter what product you go with. I just personally don't want anything to do with a balloon because if the rates don't come down, I want to renew my current rate, even if it's higher than where it's at. But I want to utilize amortization because to me, rental property is all about creating wealth. Of course, there's cash flow. That's another advantage. But more so than the cash flow is the wealth that is created, at least for me. Now, everybody's going to have a different, perspective and a different opinion. But for me, I want $100 million in debt because 20, 30 years later, I'm not going to have any debt and I'm going to have all this wealth. So that's my goal here. Probably closer to 5, 6 months ago, we did a 30-year fixed rate at 8.5%. I've done 2 at 8%. The rest of mine are below 7.5. So we have sprinkled in loans at all different rates. And if you do a bunch of them, you can kind of average them down. That one that's at 8.5% was a 30-year loan with prepayment penalties. So at some point, we'll probably refinance it to a lower rate. But you got to do the math on, how many years is it going to take to break even on that lower rate with all the additional costs and the prepayment penalties. So there's a little bit of math that's going to go in here. But at the end of the day, I think to kind of sum that question up, Michael, it's not a bad option by any means. I just don't like anything that is going to force me to balloon out. I would much rather just pick a product that is going to give me the ability to renew. Even if the rate's 10%, I'd rather be able to renew and then they go down and then I can refinance there. You can always refinance, right? That's something that we always have in our tool belt here. All right. Just beware though that prepayment penalties, assuming that you have those, can alter that a little bit. All right. What else we got here? Can you go over what you mentioned at the beginning of the Zoom? You mentioned something about cashing out up front. I love it. Absolutely. I had to take a call and didn't completely understand that. Are the local banks refinancing you with full doc or would this be DSCR? Both. We're using both DSCR and full doc. But here's the thing. It's typically only full doc one time with the local credit union or a local bank. Once you give them your taxes and they have all your docs, the next loan, the second and the third loan, unless it's another year, then they're going to want updated taxes, but usually they just want to pull your credit again. They may want to see an updated P&L. So, full doc is kind of misleading in my opinion. It's going to be full doc typically the first time, unless it's a DSCR loan, but then that's going to be more debt service coverage ratio, right? By definition, it's going to be more based on the deal itself. But even a DSCR loan, they're going to pull your credit typically. They're not going to lend to somebody that doesn't have, at least 5 to 10 grand in liquid cash available, So great question. And I will go over that, the first part of your question here. Can you go over that? So yes, of course. So Let's use a simple scenario here, guys. I am going to go, actually, no, I'll just explain it, it'd be easier. So let's say that I find a property for 80 grand and it needs 20. So I need 100,000 to be able to buy it and rehab it. But I have a hunch that it's going to appraise for 150,000 when I'm all done. So I'm getting a great deal on this property, and the rehab isn't a ton, you know. It could even be more, but let's just simple math. Buy it for 80. I need 20 more. So I need 100, plus I need interest, plus I need utilities, plus I need closing costs, plus I need a 10%, buffer on my rehab, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to say, hey, I'm pretty confident this is going to appraise for 150. And I'm pretty confident the bank is going to lend me 80% of 150. So I'm going to get my calculator out. I'm going to do 150 times 0.8. And that means that the bank's going to essentially lend me 120,000. All right. Well, if I go to the bank at the end and I say, hey, I want the whole 120, they're going to say no, because you're walking out of this bank with, roughly 20,000 gross, probably closer to 15 or even 10 with expenses. But that's going to make for a cash out. So we're only going to give you a 70% loan. So I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to do a reverse cash out. And this is the pro tip right here. So I'm going to go to my private lender and I'm going to say, hey, I need 80 to buy it and 20 to fix it, but I want 120. And they're going to say, Dave, what's the extra 20 for? And I say, it's for overages, it's for interest. And in the event that I got to bring it to close on refinance, it'll just be sitting in the bank. But I want that money now. And they're going to say, all right, cool, no problem. So the private lender is going to give me 120. I'm going to use 80 to buy. I'm going to use 20 to fix. So I'm going to have 20,000 left. I may need to spend 5, 7, 8, 9, whatever to pay the lender at closing. And I'm going to need closing costs, taxes, insurance, utilities. So let's say that, the amount that I'm going to need at closing is going to be, simple math, 115. Well, the bank is going to lend me 120 because that's what I owe my other lender. I'm not walking out of that bank with any money, even though I got $5,000 in the bank that I didn't spend. It's a reverse cash out. And that's a name I came up with. That's not a real, you could Google it. I don't know if it's even a thing. I just made that up, but it's a reverse cash out because I'm over borrowing in the beginning. And again, if I have to bring, $5,000 to the table to close the loan, I have that money in the account. I'm paying interest on it, but so what? It's typically going to be short time frames. So the advantage is I'm not asking the bank to walk with 5 or 10 or 15 or sometimes 50 grand, in some scenarios. I'm just over borrowing in the beginning. And then I'm not asking the bank to walk with anything. I'm just saying, hey, I've already borrowed this from lender A and my new lender is lender B, and lender B is going to pay back lender A. And I'm not getting anything. So because I'm not getting anything, even though I've already got some in the beginning that they don't really know about, they're not going to look at this product they're offering me as a cash out refinance. Instead, they're going to be offering me a rate and term. Dave, what did it appraise for? It appraised for 150. We're going to lend 80%. 80% of 150 is 120. How much do you owe your other lender? I owe my other lender 120, maybe even a little more with interest. Boom. They just pay off that lender. And if there's any extra, I get to keep it. Now, in that scenario, there wasn't a whole lot extra, but there's often times where I'll overborrow 40, 50, 60,000 on these bigger, where the purchase is, let's say 150 or 200 and the rehab 60 grand. I'll borrow an extra 40,000. And if I go over on my rehab, I got the money waiting. So there is that advantage. I'm not having to go back and borrow more. I typically like to over borrow a little bit, 10, 15% typically. I want to over borrow. And then when I go to my refinance, I'm not pulling cash out. It's already there. Sometimes I'll over borrow 40,000, but I'll have to bring 15 to the table. No big deal. The 40's sitting in the bank. And what's left is $25,000 that I essentially would not be kind of allowed to pull out, but I've already pulled it out in advance. So it's, it's kind of a smoke and mirrors, but it's not illegal or shady by any means. It's just the way you structure the deal with the bank. Great question. Slightly better terms too for rate and term. Absolutely. Rate and term is going to not only be at 80% most of the time, but you typically are going to get a 50 basis point cheaper interest rate. Some banks will tax you a little bit on a cash out in terms of your rate. But from my experience, it's not so much the rate is going to be higher. It's that the percentage of loan to value will be higher. So in certain neighborhoods, my bank won't lend 80%. They'll only lend 75 or even 70 in some of the lower end neighborhoods. But that's at rate and term. If I'm going and trying to do a cash out in these lower neighborhoods, they may only do 60 or 65% loan to value as a cash out. So again, it's just something you want to do. And in the slide earlier, let me back this up just for one sec. Where did
I think a good idea for that would be, David, to what you mentioned. I think a good idea would be, before you start buying properties in any neighborhood, just start calling local lenders and see even if they would do cash out refinance in those areas. You don't want to buy
like this, like the presentation here. Step one, guys, get pre-approved for long-term financing. And what I mean by get pre-approved isn't just to necessarily get the rubber stamp. That's important too. But really, it's just to open up that conversation with these local banks and local lenders and just say, hey, will you do 80% rate and term in this neighborhood? Learn what their criteria is or what their comfort level is in advance. Like, I know there's certain zip codes that my banks, even with rate and term, will not lend 80%. And that's fine. But knowing that in advance is so helpful, because now when I'm making offers, I got to make sure I'm buying at 70% minus repairs versus 75 or 80%, especially in those type of neighborhoods. So really, number one here, get pre-approved is more than just get pre-approved. I guess that's part one of it. Part two of it would be to learn your bank's risk tolerances and what they're willing to offer. And also learn what the cash out numbers are. If they're going to do a 75% cash out versus an 80% rate and term, it might make sense to just do the 75% and pull some cash out. No big deal. But if you don't know that in advance, you can get stuck. And the most important takeaway that I want you all to take away from this hour and 15 minutes at this point here, going a little long, is to not get stuck. Be prepared. Go talk to these local banks and credit unions and lenders and figure out what they're comfortable with. Are they comfortable with the neighborhood? What rates? What terms? What kind of products? Because it's only going to help you not get stuck later.
Awesome, David. Thank you, man. Yeah, man. No, this was great. I'll say one thing, man. Anybody on the call, at the end of the day, your goal should be to build long-term wealth, right? You don't want to just be wholesaling properties. The goal shouldn't be to keep wholesaling properties for the rest of your life. It's great. I look at wholesaling and flipping as a means to an end. Is build rental property portfolio. That is the ultimate wealth builder. Like David mentioned, like once you have a property, you're paying down and you just keep building wealth, you keep building equity on it. So if you're not doing it, I would just even make a goal to just start out with one property by the end of the year. Just get comfortable with the process. David laid out the entire process of what to do. Just follow step by step and just make a goal to just do one by the end of the year. And then it's the cumulative power that you'll start noticing. That's where it really starts paying off.
I've wholesaled over 700 houses in my last 8-year career. Guys, I haven't wholesaled a house in close to 6 months. It's not that I don't want to wholesale houses anymore. It's just every deal that comes across my desk, I'm like, can we rehab it and make a fix and flip, or can we keep it as a rental? Because there's just such better advantages to doing those things, right? So obviously there's always going to be a time and a place to wholesale, but the quicker, this is advice I give my students every day, the quicker you can pivot out of wholesaling into being an actual investor, the better.
Hey, David, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, find a little bit more about, BRRRR Method, what's the best way to be in contact?
Just email me. Just email me here. I'll drop my email in the chat here, guys. It's david@housesoldeasy.com. I capitalize the H and the S and the E, because if you don't, it looks like houses old easy. But yep, cool, David at Household Easy. Yeah, send me an email. I'll be happy to share the slides with you all. I can even email them over to Sharad here in a little bit, or you can email me directly and get them. I'm an open book, guys. Happy to help. And yeah, Sharad, thanks for having me, man. It's always fun to get to connect and to teach. And
absolutely, man.
Yeah, but guys, here's the thing: this isn't hard. You just gotta be committed, right? Find your long-term lender, find your local banks, or use one of the links in the thing, and then just focus on finding deals. Find those deals. And if you find a deal, you can screw up the rehab 6 different ways and still be okay. But if you're not buying at a minimum 20%, 15 to 20%, ideally bigger, right? Discount, you're going to probably leave money in the deal. Over 200 properties, my average amount of money left in a deal is probably 0 at this point. But for the first 3 years, not even 3 years, I'd say for the first 18 months, I was averaging 5,000 to 7,000 in a property. And the only reason was because I didn't know what I know now. I wasn't buying them good enough. And then there was a year period where I was averaging only $1,200 into a property, which, after a couple months of cash flow, you got your money back. But now, I'm usually walking away with 2,000 or 3,000. And the banks, here's another pro tip here before we wrap up. Banks will typically let you walk away with 3 to 5 grand before it's called a cash out refinance. Usually they draw the line somewhere between 3 and 5 grand, or they'll still let you walk with 1,800 or 2,500 or maybe even 4,000 in some scenarios and still offer you the rate and term product. But if you're trying to walk out of there with 12 grand or 27 grand or 56 grand, it's a cash out refinance. That line is somewhere between 3 and 5 grand, at least from my experience. Right? So the better discounts that you can buy at, the better. And if you want to over borrow a little bit in the beginning, like I do, you can effectively do a cash out refinance. You just cashed out in the beginning versus at the end. The main thing is you don't want the money to come to you at the refinance table. You want it to already have came to you, because then it's not the cash out. So cool.
Awesome, David. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for all being on the call. I'll see you guys next week on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thanks guys. Have a good day.